It's one of those magnetic
Okay,
pieces.
here we go.
No, it's square.
Good morning. My name is Ryan McKinney, and I am so excited to share my science fair project with you. I was riding home on the bus, and I was looking up at these power lines, and I was thinking, how does the power get from the power plant to where it's needed? And that's how I started my science fair project. I wanted to learn about how electricity travels from one place to another. And what I learned through my background research was that a conductor is needed to move electricity from one place to another. It was really interesting. And I learned that those power lines are mostly made of steel and copper. And I did more research, and I learned that actually the best conductor is supposed to be silver. So, after doing that background research, the hypothesis to my question was that if I use silver, I should see the most electricity going from where it's produced to where it's needed. Awesome. So I gathered my materials. I got a motor and a wire and a battery and some tape and a whole bunch of other materials, including these metals right here: copper, silver, steel, and a whole bunch of other metals. And I tested each one like this. I built a circuit using that battery and some wire, and the wire had alligator clips on it, as you can see in my picture right here. And what I did is I took each one of these different pieces of metal and attached it to those clips to complete the circuit. And then I had to figure out, and this took me a whole bunch of different times to do the experiment. I made a number of mistakes, as you can see in, oh, I don't have my e-logbook. Well, in my e-logbook, if I had it, you would see that I had to do this experiment over and over again. But in the end, what I figured out was if I made a contraption where I could count how many times it rotated when I had the electricity connected through each of the conductors, then I could figure out how much power was going to the motor. So I could test what material actually sends the most electricity to the motor. So what I figured out after testing this 4 different times for each of my different metals was that on average, silver delivered the most energy from the battery to the motor. I also found that the worst conductor would be zinc. So this was pretty interesting. My hypothesis was supported by my data. But what I figured out is the reason that power companies don't make power lines out of silver is because silver is really rare and really expensive. So, of course, copper and steel make a lot more sense, even though they don't carry as much electricity through them for the power company to use, because it's a lot less expensive. So, in conclusion, what I figured out was an answer to my question: what materials are the best conductors? Of course, silver is the best conductor according to my data. But in the real world, power companies are not going to spend all that money to make power lines out of silver. Instead, they use copper and steel. I made a number of mistakes in my project. First, I thought that I would be able to just use an app on my phone to measure the amount of electricity that made it through the circuit. But after trying that a whole bunch of times, I realized it didn't work out. So I had to come up with this idea. If I was going to suggest something to someone doing this project in the future, I would recommend leaving a lot of time to do this. Running all 4 of these tests was very difficult. I also didn't realize that I was going to have trouble measuring the amount of electricity going through each conductor. And finally, how is this useful in the real world? Well, I feel like if you want to have the most electricity go from where it's being produced to where it's needed, you should use silver. But of course, that's going to cost you a lot of money to do. So if you don't have a lot of money, you can use copper because it's the next best conductor. I hope that you've learned something interesting from my project, and I'd love to take any questions from you now. So instead of you guys asking questions, go ahead and
Did you
give me
exceed 3 minutes?
I probably went long. I'll go check.
Yeah, you went way over.
5 hours.
You went way over.